All right, welcome everyone to another deep dive. Today we're going to be taking a look at the EU's new competitiveness compass. Everyone's interested in how the EU plans to, kind of boost its global standing and all that. So that's what we're going to be taking a look at today. Our core source for this is actually a press release straight from the European Commission's website.
Okay.
And it's dated January 29th, 2025. So this stuff is hot off the presses.
Yeah, very recent.
Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the European Commission, like what exactly is it and why is this document so important?
Sure. So the European Commission, you can kind of think about it as the executive branch of the European Union. So they're responsible for proposing laws, implementing decisions, and basically managing the day-to-day business of the EU.
Okay.
And this document is really important because it lays out their vision for the future. How do they see the EU developing and competing on a global scale in the coming years?
And I think it's interesting, too, because, we're not necessarily based in the EU, but I think it's still something that's important for, people around the world to kind of be aware of because it does have those, ripple effects.
Yeah, it's going to have global implications for sure, even if you're not directly involved in European business or policy.
Yeah, for sure.
These things tend to have, far-reaching consequences.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess let's dive into, this competitiveness compass, right? It sounds kind of adventurous.
Yeah.
What is like the big picture here? What are they hoping to achieve with this?
Well, the first thing is they're kind of acknowledging that the EU's productivity hasn't really kept pace with other major economies over the last, say, 2 decades. So they're kind of playing catch up in a sense.
Right.
But their aim is very high. They want to make Europe like the global hub for, future tech, services, clean products, all while, being a leader in climate neutrality. So it's very ambitious.
Yeah, that's very ambitious.
Very ambitious plan.
I did notice, in the press release that the EU Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, she seems pretty confident, right? What did she have to say about this?
Yeah, she was quoted as saying that Europe has everything it needs to succeed.
Oh, wow.
But that they need to act quickly to address their weaknesses. And I think that's really where the 3 core areas for action come in.
Okay, so there's 3 core areas. What's the first one?
So the first core area is closing the innovation gap.
Closing the innovation gap.
And what they want to do is basically turn Europe into a breeding ground, if you will, for startups, particularly in what they're calling deep tech. So, AI, quantum computing, biotech, things like that.
So like cutting edge stuff.
Yeah, the really cutting edge stuff. And they even proposed, these AI gigafactories, which is kind of a catchy term.
AI gigafactories. What is that? I haven't heard that term.
So imagine like a network of research hubs spread across Europe, but all laser focused on developing and scaling up AI technologies. So it's really about taking it beyond just the research phase and actually turning it into, actual products and services.
Yeah, so they can compete.
Exactly.
It seems like they're not just talking about research here. It's really about, like, putting it into practice.
Yeah. Bring it to market.
Yeah.
And to do this, they plan to, streamline regulations, make it easier for startups to get funding.
Okay.
They also want to create a single set of rules for these innovative companies across the entire EU market.
Some sort of like a patchwork of...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So right now it's kind of a patchwork of regulations from country to country, which can be really confusing and difficult for businesses to navigate. So having one clear set of rules would definitely help.
Makes sense. Okay, so that's the first one, closing that innovation gap. What's the second one?
So the second one is decarbonization as a competitive edge.
Decarbonization as a competitive edge. That's interesting.
Yeah. It's an interesting way to frame it, right? Because a lot of people think of, the transition to clean energy as a cost for businesses.
Right.
And so they're really trying to spin it as like an opportunity to actually become more competitive.
How would that work?
So their focus is on making clean energy more accessible and affordable.
Yeah.
They're also acknowledging, the challenge of high energy prices, because obviously that's a concern.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is they're not just pushing for like brand new green industries. They're really trying to help existing industries like steel, metals, chemicals to make this transition as well.
So they're bringing everyone along. not just...
Right, not just focusing on the new.
Yeah.
They're trying to bring everyone along.
Okay. So it's kind of like a more holistic...
Yeah, more holistic approach.
Yes, I see.
And they're developing specific action plans to, help those industries adapt. They have this clean industrial deal in the works.
Oh, interesting.
Which will, hopefully lay out a roadmap for how these industries can decarbonize.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's number 2. What's the third one?
So the third one is reducing dependencies and increasing security.
Reducing dependencies. Okay, so what does that mean exactly?
So it's really about, global supply chains, access to raw materials,
Right.
trade agreements, all those things that, kind of connect us globally.
Right.
It's kind of a geopolitical element to this as well.
Right. It's how everything is so interconnected,
Exactly. They're really aiming to diversify their partnerships, especially when it comes to critical resources. So they're looking at new clean trade and investment partnerships to kind of secure those resources globally. And they're even considering using public procurement rules to favor European companies in key sectors. So it's really about achieving strategic autonomy.
So essentially, they're trying to become less reliant
Exactly.
on other countries?
Particularly for those essential resources.
Right. Especially in this kind of like global climate where things can change so rapidly.
Yeah, exactly. We've seen in recent years how supply chains can be disrupted and, the geopolitical landscape is constantly shifting. So they're really trying to make sure that they have, more control over their own destiny in a sense.
That makes a lot of sense. But then, okay, so we've got these 3 core areas and these big ideas. But how do they actually plan to like make this happen? Is it just all talk?
Right. Well, that's where these 5, what they call horizontal enablers come into play.
Horizontal enablers. I don't know if I'm familiar with that term. Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. So basically, these are like the practical tools that support the 3, bigger picture goals. So the first one is simplification.
Simplification. Okay.
So that's cutting red tape, making it easier to access EU funds, and making things easier for SMEs.
Okay. So SMEs. That's like small and medium-sized enterprises, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so less paperwork, more action, basically.
Exactly. Less bureaucracy, making things easier for businesses to operate.
Got it. What's the next one?
So then there's strengthening the single market, which is really essential for making the whole EU more competitive.
Okay.
So that means, removing barriers between countries, updating regulations, that sort of thing. Basically making it easier for businesses to operate across borders within the EU.
That makes sense.
Then the third one is financing competitiveness.
Financing competitiveness. Okay.
So this is about making it easier for businesses to get the capital they need to grow and innovate. So it's developing new investment products, creating incentives for risk takers. They're even talking about creating a European savings and investments union.
Wow. So they're really like rethinking the whole financial ecosystem.
Yeah, they're trying to think about how can they make the EU more attractive for investors? How can they, mobilize capital to support these innovative companies.
Yeah.
And then the fourth one is skills and jobs.
Okay, so it's not just about money and, technology and stuff. It's about the people, too.
Exactly. So this is all about investing in people, right? So it's promoting training, attracting talent, making sure people have the right skills for the jobs of the future. They're even calling it a union of skills.
A union of skills. I like that. That's a good name.
Yeah, it's a catchy name. It's basically acknowledging that, in this rapidly changing world, people need to constantly be learning and adapting and acquiring new skills to stay competitive.
Yeah, and it sounds like they're trying to provide a framework for people to do that.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's skills and jobs. What's the last one?
So the last one is better coordination.
Better coordination.
So this is really about making sure that the EU and the individual member states are, all on the same page and working together effectively. So to do this, they're introducing a competitiveness coordination tool to kind of align everybody's efforts. And then there's also going to be a competitiveness fund to provide, financial support.
So it sounds like they're trying to orchestrate this, really complex symphony of change.
Yeah, it's very complex. There are a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack. So we're actually going to be back in part 2 of this deep dive to kind of explore the potential impact of this plan, what it could mean for, the global landscape, all that good stuff.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to discuss.
Welcome back. So we just, we dug into, all the details of the EU's competitiveness compass.
Yeah.
And it seems like they're pretty serious about this,
Very serious.
about, really making Europe like a major, global powerhouse.
Yeah, I mean, they're not just aiming to catch up. They want to, set the pace.
Yeah, they want to be, right at the forefront. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about like the potential impact of all this.
Okay.
Like what could it mean for the rest of the world if the EU, if they actually manage to pull this off?
Well, I think, if the EU does become more competitive, I think it would likely mean a more innovative global economy as a whole, right? So you could see breakthroughs in key areas like AI, clean technology, things that would ultimately benefit everyone.
So kind of like a rising tide lifts all boats kind of situation.
Yeah, exactly. But, some boats might get a bigger lift than others.
Right. That's true. So for example, like let's take that decarbonization aspect, right? Like
Yeah.
how could that potentially play out on a global scale?
So I think, if the EU really pushes ahead with decarbonization, some experts are predicting that they might mandate, for example, all public buildings to be carbon neutral by 2030. And if that happens, I mean, that would create a huge demand for green building materials.
Right.
Right. And that would then, force innovation. It would potentially make those materials cheaper, more accessible globally.
So it would kind of benefit like the construction industry.
It would, yeah. It would benefit a lot of different industries.
Yeah.
And it could really accelerate, that transition to a low-carbon economy.
So that's a really interesting example of how like a specific action could have these like really far-reaching consequences.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's kind of a domino effect.
What about that that strategic autonomy thing, right? Like how could that reshape things?
Yeah, that's a big one. So, like we were saying before, the EU is clearly aiming to, reduce its reliance on other countries, especially for those essential resources, right? So they're going to forge new trade partnerships. They're going to explore ways to kind of boost domestic production. And this could shift global trade patterns. It could even create some friction with existing partners.
So it's like a balancing act then,
Yeah.
right? Because on the one hand, they want to, secure their own interests.
Right.
But on the other hand, they don't want to, alienate.
Yeah, they don't want to isolate themselves.
Yeah.
It's a tough, road to navigate.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've talked a lot about the economics of it, the geopolitics of it all, but what of the social impact, right?
Yeah.
Like how could this plan actually, impact people's lives on a more like personal level?
Well, one thing that's really interesting is their emphasis on skills and training.
The union of skills?
The union of skills, yeah. Imagine a Europe, right, where lifelong learning is not just, encouraged, but it's actively supported through government programs and incentives and things like that. I think if they can really create that union of skills, it could be a model for other countries that are struggling to adapt,
So it could have like, downstream impacts on like education systems and, corporate training.
Absolutely. Yeah. Workforce development programs. I mean, this could really have a significant impact on the future of work on a global scale.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Okay, so we've talked about, all the potential upsides, but obviously, no plan is perfect, right?
Yeah.
So let's take a look at some of the potential roadblocks that the EU might encounter, on this journey. What are some of the like internal challenges, right?
Well, I think, the EU is 27 different countries, each with their own economic and political interests.
Right.
And so getting everyone on board with a plan as ambitious and far-reaching as this, it's going to be a challenge. I mean,
it's like herding cats, right?
Exactly. It's a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different priorities to balance. And then, of course, there's the issue of implementation.
Yeah, because it's one thing to write it down on paper.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's another thing to actually, make it happen.
Yeah, to put it into practice.
It's going to require a lot of coordination, a lot of political will, and, hopefully a lot of bureaucratic efficiency.
And we all know how fun bureaucracy can be.
That's right. So those are some of the internal challenges. And then, you've also got external challenges.
Right. So what about like the global headwinds?
Well, global competition is a big one, right? I mean, the U.S., China, they're also investing heavily in innovation. They're vying for global leadership.
Yeah, so the EU really needs to
They need to move quickly.
Yeah, they need to step it up.
They need to be strategic. They need to be smart about how they do this.
It's like a race.
It is a race, yeah.
Yeah, it's a very high-stakes race.
Absolutely. And then, you never know what's going to happen in the world, right?
Right, yeah.
I mean, geopolitical tensions, trade wars, pandemics.
Yeah, anything could happen.
Anything could happen.
And then just throw a wrench in the whole plan.
Exactly.
Right? So it's like they got to be adaptable. They got to be resilient.
Absolutely. They have to be able to adjust to changing circumstances.
Right, right. So, I mean, it's clear that they've set some, incredibly ambitious goals here.
Yeah.
And, remains to be seen whether they can achieve them all.
Right, right. I mean, but I think even if they fall short of some of their targets, I think the very fact that they're putting forth such a bold and comprehensive plan is a sign of their determination.
Yeah, yeah.
They're serious about this.
They're serious, yeah. So it's kind of a statement that they're not content with the status quo.
Oh, exactly.
They want to actually shape the future, not just react to it.
Yeah, be proactive.
Yeah, be proactive. All right. Well, we're going to be back in part 3 of this deep dive to, wrap up our exploration of the EU's plan and leave you with some final food for thought. All right, welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the EU's competitiveness compass. We've talked about, the goals, the potential impact, the challenges.
A lot to consider.
Yeah, a lot to consider. So as we kind of wrap things up here, what are some of the key takeaways? What do you think, the average listener should really keep in mind, as they go about their day?
Well, I think the EU is sending a pretty clear message with this competitiveness compass. It's not just about making small adjustments,
Right.
This is a big change, a pretty fundamental reshaping of their economy. They're not just dipping their toes in the water here.
Right.
They're diving headfirst into this transformation.
Yeah, they're going all in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not just a few policy tweaks here and there.
Yeah.
It's really about, changing their entire approach to innovation, to sustainability, to how they engage with the rest of the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty ambitious, right?
It is.
I'm thinking about that clean industrial deal we were talking about. If they actually manage to, decarbonize these heavy industries like steel and chemicals and things like that, I mean, that could have a huge ripple effect.
Oh, absolutely.
Not just in Europe.
It would have global implications.
Yeah, because suddenly you've got, steel that's produced with significantly lower emissions.
Right.
That's being used in buildings and cars, all over the world.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the kind of impact they're going for. It's not just, limited to Europe.
Right, right. And it's not just about the environment either, right? I mean, that strategic autonomy thing, it could really reshape global trade, technology, all of that. I mean, if they really can become less reliant on other countries for those resources, for technology, that could shift the whole balance of power.
It really could.
In those industries.
Yeah. It has implications for, like you said, supply chains, national security, It's a pretty big deal.
Yeah. And, on a more kind of human level, we were talking about that union of skills idea.
Yeah.
And it seems like they're really acknowledging that, in the future, people are going to need to constantly be learning and adapting and, upskilling themselves. So I think that's a really important message as well.
It is, yeah. It's really about investing in people and recognizing that, the future of work is going to be very different from what we've seen in the past.
So, I mean, it seems like there's a lot at stake here,
Oh, there's a lot at stake.
Not just for Europe, but for, the whole world.
The whole world, yeah.
So, I mean, they're taking on a massive challenge.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
It will.
But even if they, only achieve a fraction of their goals, I think it's something that, everyone should be paying attention to.
Absolutely. It's a story worth watching.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, that's going to do it for this deep dive into the EU's competitiveness compass. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
And until next time, keep exploring.